I'm a photographer and filmmaker who's been living and working in Asia for over 17 years. I love talking to fellow photographers because I find it fascinating how each one of them has a different approach to the lens. I just love listening to them and learn from them. Today, my featured photographer is the French Arno Humbert, who describes himself as a creative explorer and a creative photographer. What struck me about his work was the minimalism in human element and also his attraction to remote places. Arno comes from an engineering background, and this gives a unique perspective and twist on how he sees things.
So if we come back to photography, I would say that from a technical point of view, definitely the technical background I had helped me to understand the formal codes of technical photography. But once you start to be some kind of creative, I would say, in photography, the whole game is to be out of the codes and to be able to improvise, to follow his own instinct. And to do that, I think you need to be okay with the technical part. So I would say that I've got this kind of combination of being familiar with the technical part, thanks to my original background, and also I've got this kind of instinct or creative mind that helped me to build these portfolios. I would say that I've always been curious about art. I've always felt this kind of emotional appeal to visual art. When I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, I was already very interested in works like paintings from Chagall, Rothko, this kind of modern art thing. And then when I started to work as a young professional, as a young engineer, I decided to explore further this kind of attraction for visual art. And I think my hidden agenda was, in a way, to turn this interest into a practice. I was not especially good at painting or at sculpting anything, but I felt that maybe photography was the thing. And so then I invested in professional equipment, and then I started to travel around the world and to practice, because obviously you need practice. And with the time, I just realized that photography, or I would say the camera, was not a barrier, was not something that would not enable me to see the world. To the contrary, the camera, the photography was an enabler, was a facilitator to interact with my environment. And I would say that the camera was the extrovert partner of the introvert photographer I was. Go through my work, you will realize that I'm particularly inspired by Japanese photography. And I would say more specifically, contemporary Japanese photography. I feel some kind of proximity to Japanese philosophy, which is based on a concept called mono aware, wabi-sabi, ma. These Japanese concepts are related to impermanence, transition space, emptiness, but emptiness not as a vacuum, not as vacuity, but an emptiness that fills the space. So I'm very much into this kind of way of seeing nature, of seeing life. I'm very inspired by this Japanese philosophy. And among the Japanese photographers that inspire me very much, I can say Hiroshi Sugimoto with the very famous seascapes, Yamamoto Masao, who is a very famous Japanese photographer, contemporary one. In his artwork, you can see that imagination collides with reality. So you don't know exactly where is reality, where is imagination. And of course, also another one called Soji Ueda, who is very famous for photographs taken in the sand dunes in the north part of Japan. So I would say that Japanese photography is the main source of inspiration for me. And in parallel, I'm very much influenced by a French photojournalist called Raymond Depardon. And Raymond Depardon, the way he writes, he talks about photography, makes a kind of echo in me. His book called Errance is particularly one of the best reading in photography I ever had. Also, Raymond Depardon has an approach to photography with this kind of empty and dry spaces, transient spaces that I really feel a kind of proximity to it. I've, let's say, explored or visited more than 80 countries, kingdoms, territories. I've got a particular attraction for harsh and remote environment. I've explored some places in Himalayas, in Antarctica, in Siberia. I've developed this kind of spirit of adventure. I like to face some kind of difficulty, some resistance when I travel, because I think that when you overcome this resistance, that's when you discover the beauty, the essence of the landscape. So it goes well with the act of photographing. And I would say that both are intimately linked. When I travel somewhere, of course, it's for discovering a place, a new place, a landscape. But I like to capture the essence of the landscape. And for that, what is better than photography for me? I mean, the still image is probably the best thing to capture this essence. There is almost, like you mentioned, something like something almost philosophical in the process. I go somewhere, I try to discover myself because I need to overcome some resistance. And at the same time, I try to let my imagination, my curiosity speak. So it's kind of a very interesting process, let's say, because obviously you need to tackle different challenges to be creative, but at the same time to be anchored in the reality. So it's a game between reality and imaginary, and I like that. Yeah, I think it really reflects my personality. There are a dual side inside me. The guy who is very rational, very anchored to reality, and there is also a guy who is much more into imagination, into this kind of, I would say, irrational universe, visual universe. Yeah. For me, photography is a process. I'm not looking for the top shot, the best shot. I'm just looking for nice stories. I'm looking for something to tell to the people. I'm looking for a portfolio. And I'm not so interested in depicting the world, depicting the reality of the world. For me, photography is not a purpose. Photography is a process, is a mean. If I could paint, I would paint. I just know how to make photography, so I do photography.